write your name at the top of his list. And the Statue of Liberty started shaking her fist. And the eagle will fly, and it's gonna be here. I brought to you courtesy of the red, white, and blue.
It's time for Veterans Issues, the show that brings you information about veterans, military, and their families. Now here's your host, Ken Rollins.
Thank you for that intro there, Gerhard, and we appreciate it. We are brought to you by the Red, White, and Blue. Today's guest is, I got a guest from the Navy, I got one from the Army, and he's also the city manager of Anniston. Stay where you are. Get your pen. Be right back. Welcome back to Veterans Issues. I'm still Ken Rollins, and we're going to talk to a fellow today that was served in the Navy. He also served in the Army. Very interesting career, and he's also the city manager of Anniston, Alabama, and we welcome to the show Brian Johnson. Boy, you got a grip. I'm gonna file workman's comp. Brian, for the folks out there, you know all about you, and I know a little bit about you, but let's let the folks know where you come from, and how you ended up in Anniston as a city manager first.
Well, I took a rather circuitous route. Originally was born and raised in Hendersonville, North Carolina, in the mountains. And to essentially make a long story short, is how I got in the military is really, it was due to the fact that at the time I became my own man, so to speak, meaning graduated from high school, went away to college, grew up in a house that had a very strict discipline and regimen. But the problem had been that discipline had not been mine. It had been my father's, especially. And so when I got on my own, I hadn't developed my own discipline and self-control. Wow. So I went away to college, and I did not particularly pay attention to my responsibilities, going to class all the time, all that kind of stuff. So I ended up getting put on academic probation and lost some of my scholarship. Yeah. And I went back to my parents, especially my old man, and I was like, well, I need you to help me with tuition. And my dad was like, I'm not helping you. You're the one who created this. And so I remember going into student, the student aid and talking about what it would take. And it was, I was going to have to work so many hours. And so I was like, screw it. And I walked down to the recruiting, the strip mall there in Lincoln, Nebraska, as I was at the University of Nebraska, and went in and enlisted in the Navy and got the Navy College Fund and GI Bill. So I did have plans to go back and finish, but I went in and enlisted in the military, and that's how I got into the military. It wasn't necessarily a plan, from Jump Street, although I had both my grandfathers fought in World War II, and I remember sitting at their knee and being, fascinated with the stories of what they were involved. But regardless, that's how I got in there, and that's also how Uncle Sam did not disappoint and did get me that discipline and self-control I had been lacking prior to that.
Let me stop you there before you go to the Army. Now, I hear a lot of people say, well, I had watched relatives in my family, and I just wanted to wear that uniform, but that wasn't your case. Yours was out of necessity, and the want to and here to be your own person.
Well, yeah, but there could have been a lot of things I could have done outside of that. So I guess the fact that it was very quick for me to say, you know what, I want to go and do that, it really wasn't a difficult decision. Yeah, there was a necessity for me to do something, but I could have just not gone back to college. I could have, just gotten a job. I could have done a lot of stuff, but I thought, you know what, if there ever was a time for me to go and do something that I had kind of, toyed with. It's just growing up in a household. My father was not prior service, and so.
What year was this?
This was in 1993.
Okay, so you did catch Desert Storm, Iraq.
The very end, yeah. But of course, by the time I went through basic training and boot camp and everything, that was done, and we were kind of in the that period of time in between the first Gulf War and Iraqi freedom. Yeah. It was really later on that I got back to Iraq.
Well, I was doing some research. You ended up getting 2 Bronze Stars for valor. So that at some point there you was.
Yes, later on my career, we talk about how I got there. I ultimately ended up being an officer in the Army and was there during the invasion of Iraq.
Well, we'll just skip on that. Now you was in the Army, but I saw, in doing some research, I saw that you know, you're city manager now, and you organize, if I'm right, in Sauter City, you organized a government there. Is that, did I hit that right, or did I do wrong?
No,
research?
you did. When the invasion, when the Saddam Hussein regime fell, collapsed, and 3rd Infantry Division had the green zone and all of the northern part of Baghdad. I was the officer in charge of a sector of Baghdad called Sauter City. It's a suburb of Baghdad, and it's a rough one. And as the officer in charge of it, and it was with my unit, you know, all my guys there was literally no local government at all.
Wow.
I mean, it's essentially like if we were getting invaded, and the invading army is getting close to Anniston, everybody here would, as it, you know, right before that invading army got here, would kind of just drop what they're doing and leave, either hunker down in their house or drive away. And so all services stopped. Police were no longer on the street, trash wasn't being collected, doctors weren't going to the hospital. There was nothing because nobody knew what the invading army was going to do. Of course, their propaganda was that we were going to, you know, eat their babies and rape their women and do all this, you know, that's how they were. And so they were all scared. So we get in there, and for a while, the American, you know, GI had to provide essentially all those local government functions. But part of the collateral duty that I had was not only to be supervising the 240 guys I had under my command to provide police and other, you know, functions, medical response, but to go back, find and recruit those municipal workers that made that city run. So, you know, you think about it, you take, like, say, your trash collectors for granted. They stopped collecting trash for a couple weeks or a couple months, and you got big problems.
That in itself is
Yes, it is. And so you got to get them back. So you had to recruit doctors back to the hospital, police back to do the streets, all that kind of stuff. That's where I got into local government and my love for local government.
What I'm hearing there, though, you're getting Sunnis, Shiite, you're getting other nomads, I guess you would, in between those two. It's nothing like having Democrats and Republicans and females and male gender, all this stuff that you have to do that you did in the city, that comes into play because they all have to work together, or the end item is frustration at least. I can imagine that.
Well, I mean, you are right. All of these, you know, opposing groups that you can kind of come up with examples of, whether it's black, white, or male, female, or Sunni, Shia, whatever it is. You know, Auburn, Alabama. I mean,
oh well, we don't ever want to go there.
But I did have the distinct pleasure of being put through some formal training on conflict resolution and negotiation, and it does come in handy sometimes, especially to remember that for there to be a successful negotiation, there has to be, both parties have to leave that thinking two things. One, they did gain some concessions from the other side, but also that they felt like they had to give up something. And that's important because if one side leaves, even if they agreed to terms then, but they leave feeling like they gave up a lot more and it was one-sided, they're not invested in whatever the negotiation may have been. Both sides has to feel like, you know, and that has come into, you know, to play oftentimes, even if it's symbolic stuff where you're like, look, I think we've got them, we've got their pressure point, we could force them into agreeing to this, but you look at the other side and you're like, if I was on their side, I would feel disgruntled, I would be upset. You gotta give both sides something to walk away from. Yes, just like husband and wife. I mean, we all know the same thing. We have, and so I did. You know, it does come in handy sometimes when you're dealing with local matters because we've got sometimes just as nasty of stuff.
So about nasty, they're telling me I got to go to a break. Run over. Got to go to commercial. Pay attention to what this is. We'll be right back, folks. Welcome back to Veterans Issues. We're talking to Brian Johnson. Brian, we left, you know, we've organized Sauter City, and you're talking about the difficulties in doing that. It's similar to some of the things you have to do in an American city. Just off the cuff, do you think, there's a reason I'm asking you, do you think you can do anything with Detroit?
I don't think so. I think that's a lost cause.
Oh, somebody in my ears from Detroit. That's it. I was, and I had to do that to her. But anyhow, when you come into to a city like you serve at the pleasure of the council and the mayor, but you actually run the day-to-day business of the city. When you run into the not Republican, Democrat, but different people wanting different things for the city, that's similar to what you were talking about there. But the difference was over there, they shoot each other and kill you.
They will, and of course, unfortunately, sometimes we have that here, not as much. Yeah. But, you know, and some of ours don't go back thousands of years, literally,
right?
Like they do there. But no, here in local government in the states, party affiliation at the local level is really not that much. I mean, potholes really don't care if you're Democrat or Republican.
Absolutely.
You know, school systems don't really care. You know, I mean, those kind of, so you generally don't run into that. What you run into at the local government level especially is because that's the government of last resort. That's the government that provides all direct services, not any of the entitlement programs or the indirect services like, say, a county health department that not everyone uses. Yeah. All of ours is basically stuff, you know, local governments provide all the stuff that people use. Roads, water and sewer, police, fire, those kind of things. And where we run into is really just the age-old infinite need with a finite budget.
Well, you know, I noticed something, I interrupt you there. I noticed something that happened a few years ago. I was in environmental at the Anderson Army Depot. And all of a sudden an order came down that we will manage our stormwater runoff. That lives up to me and one other person that's working in the evenings, drawing out the diagrams for all that best management plan of what was coming from what building and what the chemical might be if it had a spill, what we could look for at the outfalls. If not, there was a fine that would buy you a couple of depots if you didn't do that. So you've had that in the city of Anniston, but I don't want to get off on that. What I want to do is important to me because our audience is in Jefferson County, Coleman, and all over through the ATTU verse. And I want the people out there to know, number one, that Anniston is open for business. Number two, you have a lot to do with the Fort McClellan, and that facility out there that was closed down is now your baby, so to speak. Well, it's a body, but for representing the city of Anniston, you got Buckner Circle, the most beautiful place out there. I want you to talk about that a little bit, but let the people in the St. Clair County area that might be wanting to relocate or something to know today that it's a welcome mat for them.
Well, one of the when it was time for in the I guess course of my family's growth for me to go from the last city I was manager, it was time for me to move to a bigger city. I had a number of offers. The reason Anniston stood out was there's a number of things, but one of the things that stood out is as a veteran especially, it had a former military installation, active duty military installation. So when I came out and visited, there was some enticing aspects to that as a veteran. One, of course, is the former Fort McClellan. 10,000 of those acres are developable. And having that as a city manager was exciting, exciting. And, McClellan Development Authority is a component unit of the city, so we work very closely with them. And we have a lot of our assets and resources out there. But that was one thing, is the excitement of what we can do. The other thing is, having been an infantry officer, my training post had been Fort Benning.
Right.
And Fort Benning's main housing, officer housing area and cantonment area was constructed at the same time of Fort McClellan's and the same character. When you got up on, the first time I drove up on Buckner Circle was actually the mayor driving me up there when they were recruiting me, and it took my breath away. It was like Fort Benning all over again.
101, yeah.
And only to find out that, those houses were available for purchase. And so ultimately we ended up buying a house, and I live, on Buckner Circle. And so we're one of the lucky few that to get to live on a military installation, a former military installation. What's really awesome about it is two things that just stand out every day. Is one, it's almost like I want to say the ghosts, but all of those officers that lived in that house with their families going back to World War I times, just if the walls could talk. It's and then the second thing is reveille, retreat, and taps. Every day is played by the National Guard, Fort McClellan stuff that you hear from our house. My kids have gotten to know, and every day I get a reminder about what who's still serving, the sacrifice people made. That is just the power. I'll never get in a neighborhood
Wow.
like this. So
I didn't know they
it's
did that.
exciting.
I
Yes.
did not. But you see the movie We Were Soldiers?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, see, I went down and did an interview with Hal Moore. I've been knowing him a lot
I've
of
met
years.
him too.
And the movie, if you remember, a lot of it filmed around those government quarters.
Well, I was in the infantry officer basic course at Benning when it was being filmed, and they asked for volunteers to be part of the extras. You just had to say, and I didn't want to, but so I saw them blocking it off. Yes.
They showed the
Company-
housing, but
Yep.
one thing, Julie Moore, Hal's wife, General Moore's wife, says, now they should not, you GIs should have caught this at the beginning, because they had Lieutenant over here, the one that got
Yes.
killed, and Lieutenant
Right next
Colonel.
to,
He
Lieutenant
said, there
Colonel.
is no way. She said, there is no way. I said, well, when she said it, it automatically came. But those, you are right. I mean, I never compared it to Fort McClellan, but General Hines alluded to that. He was a commander out here at one time, and we were standing here at Oxford Lake, and he was telling me that one of the things he likes about Fort McClellan was it reminded him of Fort Benning, and I thought, ranges and things like that, but never did a comparison to the housing.
And even up there, Buckner Circle was the field grade officer.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel and up.
Absolutely.
Drennan Drive was the company grade, and that's still there too, but that was just a little bit smaller houses, so it's still separate.
They've got like a condo management housing.
Homeowners Association.
Homeowners, and
yes.
you're ahead of that? Or
I was the one left holding the short straw.
Bless you.
Yes.
But that's awesome in itself. But I want people out there to know there's thousands of acres out there for development. Great access. Now, I timed 7 minutes doing the speed limit from I-20 to 431 over there, the other day, 21, 431 south. 7 minutes. I can go from right there on 21 south and 431 and be right at I-20 exit.
And only 5 traffic lights.
How about that?
It's on Veterans Memorial Parkway between I-20 and McClellan.
I'm talking doing the speed limit. I did it on purpose just to see how long it takes. So 7 minutes versus you don't have to go up and down Quintard anymore if you're in the business. So the people out there that's watching this, you've got a business you like to relocate, and if you've got a Krispy Kreme donut, come on over here. Would you accept a Krispy Kreme?
Oh, in a second.
I mean, you got lots of donuts, but ain't nobody doing it.
Well, in McClellan's master plan, so there are areas that are specifically for industrial development, specifically for residential, retirement. There's an independent living facility that's getting ready to have $22 million put in. I mean, it's all of it.
I got less than a minute, but I want to say, I'm in a meeting with some of your folks tomorrow. Some of the folks from the Spirit of Anniston is no longer, but there's another group that's
Main Street Anniston.
Main Street with Kent Smith, Kent Davis, and all of them. I'm going to meet with them, but this is the things that I'm hearing in the out years is a lot different from the old. Let's do a little bit here and a little here, plant a bush here and that thing, right?
We are very much have a more global perspective of what we want to do, and you got to have a plan.
Yeah.
We got a plan, and we're executing the plan. We're getting close to there, but it's not like you said, a little bit here, a little bit there. We're definitely looking at more strategically.
Right,
about
they got a
this whole
plan
thing.
now. I'm going to come back and talk some more with you. Stay right there.
Okay.
We're going to come back and news you can use. I'm going to talk a little bit more with Brian. Be right back. Welcome back to Veterans Issues. I had just run out of time there with Brian Johnson, the city manager of Anniston. And Brian, I was saying that you changed from the Spirit of Anniston, where we plant a bush here and plant a bush there, going to bigger things. This group is coming way over into Quintard. And what I'm talking about is the Memorial Park up there, that we can do some things that market that. And of course, I don't know if you know about it, we got a signage effort going in. We're going to ask Randy Wood to put signs on the interstate talking about what's up to there. But is anything else I left off in a minute you can tell me about that we need to talk about?
Well, without getting into specifics, I think the important thing is the only way that you can get some of this done is to start at the top. And when you start at the top in a city, you start with the elected body.
Right.
And the first thing that I could say is the elected body here for the first, this administration has returned integrity and decorum back to City Hall. I can only be as effective as my elected body, my board, allows me to be. And my staff can only be, And so these things that we're talking about doing, or wanting to do or planning to do can only happen when you have leadership at the top who is taking their energy, and instead of fighting amongst themselves, they're using that energy to try to solve some of the challenges that we have. And that's why you've seen some of the, the accomplishments of late. So that's all I can say is just, that kind of stuff is exciting times here because we've got good leadership.
I've seen that motto, the one city, one vision, but I have personally seen Millie Harris and Sarah Celeste and all of them
Jay Jenkins. Yep.
Jay Jenkins is just super to help us out on he designed that memorial up there and everything, but you got some good people that's going into, I see them in the community, and I see Millie out there picking up trash and things like that, something you never saw before, so you got some good stuff going. I wish all the best for the city of Anniston. That's where I went to school, was Johnson Junior High. That's my
bleed
town.
Anniston, so we appreciate all you do for us too.
Right. Appreciate it. We got to go to some news you can use. Remember and I had to do this morning, folks, program into my iPhone. I had to program 2415 7th Avenue South. That's the location for the parking for the VA hospital over there. And I got a friend that just had triple bypass over there. Terry Turner had triple bypass. We're wishing him the best. Terry performed at our Memorial Day service, and he's had triple bypass, and then he's going to come there. I'm going to have him on the show. He's a veteran also. And remember that this is what every week I got to let you remind you of this. 22 veterans will take their life today. 22. One is too many, but 22 are taking their lives. Some of them just need somebody to talk to. So if you know a veteran, especially those just returning from Iraq, Afghanistan, give them a shoulder, give them an ear, let them listen. Now, Kia Stores on South Quintard and Gadsden to sponsor the show, and Don Hopkins is a Special Forces retiree, and you heard me say I don't like Special Forces, but there's a little inside joke about that, and he knows why. But they are on fire down there selling automobiles, and I appreciate them. He gives first responders and veterans special deals down there, so go by and see Don and any of the folks down at Kia Stores and tell them you thank them for sponsoring veteran issues. And I'm not going to talk about the legislatures as I have been in the past, but I hope that they don't bring that legislation back that they did this past time, but if they do, I'm going to be sitting here pointing my finger at them and letting you know who it is. If you want to purchase that law enforcement tag, that'll help us build those memorials up there. So when you go get a tag, tell them you want to see that law enforcement tag. And it is beautiful. We're not going to show it to you today, but it goes with any car, and you do not have to be in law enforcement to get one of them. We'll see you here next week. This week's salute goes out to all of you that purchased that law enforcement tag, and we got to go. We'll salute. We're out of here.